Hello. The history of writing is a gateway to one of humanity's greatest inventions. Writing is not merely the arrangement of letters. It is the solidification of thought, knowledge, and memory. In this journey, ink has been a silent yet most faithful companion. Every mark transferred onto soil, clay tablets, papyrus, parchment, and paper is, in fact, a reflection of humanity's effort to communicate with future generations. From symbols stamped like seals in the ancient world, to meticulously copied manuscripts in medieval monasteries, from the printing press revolution to modern ink technologies, each step has marked a turning point in the flow of writing. Tracing the path of ink is therefore not merely studying a material, it is reading the story of civilization itself. The first trace, the birth of writing, and the quest for meaning writing is one of the greatest intellectual revolutions in human history. Yet, this revolution did not occur overnight. The birth of writing was the result of thousands of years of evolution and humanity's effort to make sense of the external world. Early humans began leaving marks on objects to describe their surroundings and convey their experiences. The earliest examples of these traces can be found in caves such as Lascaux and Chauvet. On the walls of these caves, there are animal figures, hunting scenes, and symbolic signs dating back 17,000 to 30,000 years. These drawings were a kind of visual memory system that predated writing. However, these images were not a written language in the modern sense. They served more as carriers of collective memory and rituals. Humans attempted to inscribe events they wished to convey into memory through these drawings. At this stage, writing did not yet exist, but the desire to leave meaning behind had already begun. Over time, the drawings became more abstract, particularly with the Neolithic era and the emergence of agricultural societies. The need to store information increased. Counting products with numbers, marking tallies for calculations, and indicating who received what through signs became necessary. This development laid the groundwork for writing. Then, around 3200 BCE, the Sumerians appeared. This civilization, living in Mesopotamia, developed the world's first known writing system, cuneiform. This system was created by pressing reed styluses into soft clay tablets. Initially, it was based on pictograms, where each sign represented an object. But soon, these symbols began to represent sounds and concepts as well. Writing had transformed from mere drawings into a systematic language. This transformation altered the course of history. The invention of writing marked the beginning of recorded history. Humanity could now preserve stories orally transmitted in writing, ensuring that knowledge could be passed down through generations without distortion. The earliest written records were primarily economic: debts, product lists, property records, and taxes. Over time, however, royal decrees, heroic epics, and religious texts were also recorded. Writing became a tool not only for transmitting information, but also for establishing power, creating laws, and building culture. Memory no longer resided solely in human minds. It began to live on clay tablets, stone slabs, and rolls of papyrus. Humanity had, for the first time, materialized its thoughts, stepping beyond speech and opening the door to permanence. From symbol to sound. The evolution of the alphabet. The earliest forms of writing were based on drawing what was seen. These writings, known as pictographic writing, directly represented objects. For example, a drawing of a cow literally depicted a cow. Yet this system had its limitations. Abstract concepts, emotions, relationships, and actions could not be easily conveyed. Humanity required a more flexible and expressive means of communication. This need led writing into its next phase. Ideograms. Now, the symbols drawn could represent not just objects, but also concepts. For instance, a sun symbol did not only depict the sphere of light in the sky, but also carried abstract meanings, such as day or light. However, the true breakthrough occurred when writing began to represent sounds. This revolution made writing easier to learn and spread. The transition from symbol to sound marked a turning point in human communication history. The pioneers of this revolutionary step were the Phoenicians. Around 1200 BCE, this merchant civilization along the Mediterranean coast developed the first alphabet system in the sense we know today. Each letter represented a specific sound. Instead of memorizing complex ideograms, it was now possible to write endless words using a limited set of symbols. The Phoenician alphabet spread throughout the Mediterranean via trade routes. The Greeks adopted and further developed it, introducing a significant innovation. Vowels were added alongside consonants. This made the alphabet more phonetic, allowing spoken language to be more easily rendered in writing. With the evolution of the Greek alphabet, the Latin alphabet emerged. Later, the power of the Roman Empire spread it across much of Europe. Today, most Western alphabets are derived from the Latin script. A similar process unfolded in the East. Systems such as the Arabic alphabet, Hebrew script, and Brahmi-derived Indian alphabets served the same purpose within their regions, capturing language in written form and making knowledge permanent. At this stage, writing was no longer the exclusive domain of rulers, scribes, or priests. It became a tool accessible to broader segments of society. Letters were the key to decoding and reproducing language. And when humanity discovered the power to represent every sound with a sign, thoughts could finally be contained not just in speech, but also on paper. Clay, reed, and ink, the tools of writing. Writing is not only the expression of thought, but also an act of leaving a trace. And the medium that carries this trace is not merely the idea itself, but the material and tools that transmit it. The history of writing is, in essence, also a history of surfaces and instruments. In Mesopotamia, where the first examples of writing appeared, texts were inscribed on clay tablets. This soft material, obtained from the earth, could be easily shaped and hardened by drying in the sun. The writing process required a stylus made from reed stalks. Prepared with a cut tip, the stylus left triangular and linear impressions on the clay. This technique gave writing its name, cuneiform. This method was durable yet limiting. Tablets were heavy, fragile, and difficult to transport, and each could carry only a limited amount of information. Therefore, lighter, more flexible, and easily portable alternatives were sought. Ancient Egypt offered a solution with papyrus. The stalks of the papyrus plant, grown along the Nile, were cut into thin strips, layered horizontally and vertically, and dried to form a paper-like surface. Writing on this surface required a new tool, ink and a reed pen. The earliest inks were made by mixing natural pigments such as charcoal, soot, red earth, and iron oxide with water or animal-based binders. This ink became a liquid that accelerated and diversified the flow of writing. Writing was no longer merely an inscribed form. It became a flowing line. Over time, writing surfaces also diversified. Parchment, particularly in the Western world, represented a significant revolution. Made from animal skins, it was both durable and writable on both sides. Parchment became the new standard for preserving knowledge. Alongside this, rolled texts gradually gave way to codices, leaf-based books, the ancestor of today's book. During this period, writing became not only practical, but also an aesthetic endeavor. In monasteries, monks decorated sacred texts, transforming pages into works of art with gold leaf, colored inks, and intricate illustrations. Writing became a combination of devotion and artistry. In the Far East, a distinct development occurred. In China, paper production advanced significantly by the 2nd century CE. Paper, being cheaper and more accessible, played a crucial role in the mass dissemination of writing. Chinese ink itself evolved into an art form. Calligraphy, seal engraving, and brushwork emphasized the visual dimension of writing. Paper quickly spread to the Islamic world, and from there to Europe. Institutions such as the House of Wisdom in Baghdad facilitated both paper production and the use of writing as a primary vehicle for scientific knowledge. The story of writing is thus not only the story of ideas, but also of material technology. From clay tablets to papyrus, from reed pens to quills, from parchment to paper, each reflects humanity's value for writing and the desire to preserve it. And every drop of ink becomes a carrier, transmitting the voice of the past to the present. Sacred lines, the intersection of religion and writing. The history of writing is not only the history of commerce, governance, or science. It is also the history of faith. Humanity did not use writing solely to record the world. It was also employed to understand and convey the sacred. Over time, writing became the bearer of divine words, the visible language of religion. Most of the earliest texts were economic records, yet it was not long before the words of kings and gods began to appear on the same tablets. In Sumer, the commands of deities were inscribed, establishing religious authority over society. Writing became not only the instrument of rulers, but also the representative of divine order. This transformation gradually materialized in larger texts, In Egypt, the texts known as the Book of the Dead were written to ensure the safe journey of the deceased into the afterlife. Filled with hieroglyphs, these texts were carved onto tomb walls or recorded on papyrus scrolls. Writing had now become a tool that reached beyond death. The Hebrew sacred texts, from the stone tablets of the Torah to parchment scrolls, exemplify how writing evolved into a unifying symbol for a people. Preserving these texts, copying them accurately, and transmitting the sacred words without alteration carried immense responsibility. Writing was seen as the key to communication between God and humanity. With Christianity, writing played a central role in the dissemination of the Bible. Until the invention of the printing press, Bibles were painstakingly copied and adorned in monasteries. Every letter was written with almost sacred ritual, and scribes worked with the awareness that they were transmitting God's word. In Islam, writing acquired a distinct significance. From the very first day, the Quran was memorized orally and meticulously transcribed. The artistic interpretation of Arabic letters, calligraphy, was not merely an aesthetic choice, but an expression of profound religious reverence. Here, writing evolved from transmitting God's words into a form of worship itself. The widespread circulation of these sacred texts also transformed attitudes toward writing. Writing became more than a tool. It became an inviolable value, a heritage to be preserved. When ink carried the words of God, every drop of it carried meaning. This period also marked the beginning of writing's reach into wider society. As sacred texts multiplied, people exerted greater effort to learn reading. Literacy was regarded not only as a worldly skill, but also as a spiritual virtue. Through sacred texts, writing became perhaps for the first time in human history a bridge between spirit and matter. Letters conveyed not only words but also faith and belief. Paper and the printing press, the revolution of knowledge. Dissemination. The journey of writing is not only the evolution of symbols, but also the history of how knowledge is accessed. There is a difference between carrying a thought and reproducing it. As humanity developed ways to access knowledge, societies themselves were shaped by that knowledge. Early writings were inscribed on stone or clay tablets. This ensured the permanence of thought, but not its shareability. Knowledge was recorded, yes, but the number of people who could see it remained limited. Thus, the true power of writing had to be tested by another question. How many people can this knowledge reach? The first answer was paper. In China, during the Han Dynasty, a court official named Kai Lun developed a new material in the 2nd century CE. Plant fibers, rags, and fishing nets were pulped into a fine mixture. When dried and pressed, it produced the first known paper. Paper was light, flexible, portable, and, most importantly, reproducible. Its emergence began to free writing from the monopoly of elite scribes. Paper spread along the Silk Road to Central Asia and eventually to the Islamic world. The Battle of Talas in 751 CE marked a turning point in this spread. Chinese craftsmen captured as prisoners brought paper-making skills to cities such as Samarkand and Baghdad. Centers such as the House of Wisdom saw scientific, philosophical, medical, and astronomical works translated into Arabic, and these texts were now written on accessible paper rather than expensive parchment. Paper became fundamental not only for scholarly production, but also for education, law, and daily life in the Islamic world. Fatwas, poetry, trade records, and even personal letters all found this new medium. Yet knowledge was still copied by hand. Hundreds of pages were transcribed individually. Producing a book took months and was affordable only to the elite. This bottleneck gave rise to the second great step in the revolution of knowledge, the printing press. Printing technology was first used in China in the 9th century, where texts were carved onto wooden blocks and inked onto paper. However, each page required a separate block, making the system neither flexible nor fast. The turning point came in 15th century Europe with a metalworker named Johannes Gutenberg. Gutenberg cast each letter as an individual metal type. When arranged in lines and inked, these types allowed countless copies to be produced from a single set. His first major work, the Gutenberg Bible, 1455, was not just a book. It was a key that opened the door to an era. The impact of the printing press was staggering. Book production accelerated by hundreds of times. Literacy became necessary not only for clergy, but also for merchants, artisans, and students. Ideas transcended geographic boundaries. Transformations such as the Reformation, the Renaissance, and the Enlightenment emerged within this new flow of knowledge. The printing press broke the monopoly over information. Texts became not only sacred but also open to scrutiny. When paper and the printing press came together, writing reached the hands of the people for the first time. Knowledge was no longer just transported. It spread. And for perhaps the first time in human history, a system based on the sharing of knowledge rather than its monopoly became possible. From handwriting to keyboard, from mechanical to digital. Throughout the history of writing, not only what was written, but also how it was written, underwent change. And this change was not merely formal. It also shaped the way we think and communicate. The transition from handwriting to digital keyboards quietly but profoundly transformed humanity's relationship with writing. From ancient times to the Middle Ages, writing was largely a manual endeavor. Reed pens, quills, bunk, and brushes were used. Letters were inscribed carefully and deliberately onto paper, one by one. Writing demanded physical skill and patience. It was both a time-consuming and mentally engaging art. Scribes working in monasteries would spend hours at their desks copying texts. The process was slow, yet deeply immersive. Each letter passed through the mind before flowing through the fingers. Thought became flesh and bone through the hand. Writing was, in essence, thinking itself. However, in the 19th century, this ritual began to change. The Industrial Revolution mechanized the act of writing. Enter the typewriter. The first typewriters, developed in the 1860s, quickly became indispensable in bureaucracy, journalism, and business. Writing with a typewriter was faster, producing legible, orderly, and reproducible text. Yet, this transformation also weakened our physical connection to letters. We no longer drew letters. We pressed them. The typewriter accelerated both the production and consumption of writing. Writing was no longer merely a literary or intellectual pursuit. It became a routine task. This change quickly accelerated further. From the 1980s onward, personal computers and digital keyboards entered daily life. Writing began to be associated with screens. The keyboard became a bridge between our fingertips and the glowing surface of the display. Writing shed ink and became light. This digitalization made writing extraordinarily easier. Typos could be corrected with a single keystroke. Texts could be copied in seconds. Written words could instantly reach a global audience online. Yet this convenience also weakened our direct contact with writing. The rhythm of pen on paper, the synchronization of hand and mind, was replaced by rapid keystrokes. Nonetheless, this new era did not diminish the value of writing. On the contrary, writing became more prolific, more shareable, and more interactive than ever. Emails, messages, blogs, and social media posts all are new forms of writing. Today, writing occurs not only with pen, but also through screens, algorithms, and even artificial intelligence. But the core remains the same: the desire to express a thought, the need to leave a mark. Writing may change its form, but its essence endures. Writing is humanity's effort to make itself permanent. And whether through ink or pixels, this endeavor remains one of the deepest traces of our existence. Typography and identity, the aesthetics of letters. Typography refers to the formal arrangement and visual presentation of written characters. Yet this arrangement is not merely an aesthetic choice, it is also a cultural and historical process. The form of letters has evolved alongside a society's material technologies, writing habits, and modes of communication. In early writing systems, the shape of letters depended directly on the surface and tool used. The angular and slanted form of cuneiform resulted naturally from using a reed stylus on soft clay. The detailed, figurative appearance of hieroglyphs stemmed from carving onto stone surfaces. These forms were shaped more by portability and durability than by ease of reading. In ancient Rome, the type known as capitalis monumentalis was designed for stone monuments. The height, width, and thickness of letters were carefully calculated to ensure readability, particularly in public inscriptions, representing one of the earliest conscious examples of typography. During the Middle Ages, writing merged with the tradition of manuscript production. Monastic scribes copying texts such as the Bible developed the Gothic script. Gothic letters were dense, pointed, and narrow, providing both an aesthetic style and a practical way to fit more text onto expensive parchment. With the invention of the printing press, letter forms began to be standardized. In the 15th century, Johannes Gutenberg's lead-cast types emphasized both readability and reusability. The black-letter font, used by Gutenberg, drew on Gothic manuscript traditions. In subsequent centuries, particularly during the Renaissance, Roman and Italic typefaces were developed. These were simpler and easier to read. During this time, the distinction between serif and sans serif fonts also emerged. Serif fonts feature small projections at the ends of letters, which guide the reader's eye across lines and are preferred for long texts. Sans serif fonts, by contrast, have clean, straight edges, conveying a modern minimalist aesthetic. These distinctions gradually became associated with the character of historical periods. In the 19th and 20th centuries, especially with the rise of the Industrial Revolution and advertising, typography became an essential communication tool. Newspapers used bold, large headlines to attract attention. Posters relied on type variations to convey messages quickly. Modern typography, influenced by movements such as Bauhaus, emphasized simplicity and functionality. Typefaces were designed for clarity and usability. For example, the Helvetica typeface was widely adopted by government institutions and transportation systems in the 20th century due to its readability, simplicity, and universal appeal. Today, thousands of fonts exist in digital form, each associated with specific emotions, industries, or cultural codes. A luxury brand might prefer thin, serifed fonts, while a tech company might use clean sans serif fonts to convey trust and simplicity. Typography shapes the identity of a text. The same sentence can have a completely different impact depending on the typeface. Thus, typography is not just the appearance of writing, it is the voice, stance, and context of communication itself. The language of codes, Unicode, and digital alphabets. Throughout history, writing has always been a visual trace. On clay tablets, letters were impressed with a stylus. On papyrus, they were brushed with reeds. On parchment, they were carefully inscribed with quills. But in the final decades of the 20th century, writing began a new journey. It left its physical forms behind and entered the digital world. This was not just a change in tools. It was a transformation in the very nature of writing, how it is structured, represented, and shared. Computers don't see letters the way we do. For a computer, the letter A is not a shape you recognize. It's a sequence of zeros and ones, a string of binary digits that represents data in the digital realm. And because every letter, number, or symbol must be represented numerically, humans had to create systems to assign codes to each character. One of the earliest systems was called ASCII, short for the American Standard Code for Information Interchange. Developed in 1963, ASCII covered only 128 characters. It included the English alphabet, basic punctuation, numbers, and some control codes. However, ASCII had serious limitations. Languages with special letters, like Turkish chi, yi, shi, or German a, oi, u, were missing. French accents, Greek, Russian, Arabic letters. None of these fit in this narrow set. Each country ended up creating its own character sets, called code pages, but they were often incompatible. Text that looked correct on one computer might appear scrambled or filled with strange symbols on another. To solve this problem and standardize writing across the globe, the Unicode Consortium was founded in 1991. Its mission was ambitious: to create a single universal system capable of representing every writing system in the world. Unlike ASCII, which focused only on the Latin alphabet, Unicode aimed to include Latin, Cyrillic, Arabic, Hebrew, Chinese, Korean, and many more. Every character is assigned a unique number, known as a code point. For example, the letter A is U+041. The Turkish letter C is U+0E7. The Russian Ya is U+042F. The Arabic Esh is U+634. The Chinese Zhong is U+4E2. The Unicode is vast. It consists of 17 planes, each capable of holding 65,536 characters. That means it can represent over 1.1 million unique symbols, though today, about 150,000 are actively in use. But Unicode doesn't stop at letters. It also includes punctuation, symbols, mathematical signs, religious icons, technical characters, and even emojis. Because each character has the same code no matter the platform, text appears correctly across iOS, Windows, Android, Linux, and other systems. Different alphabets can coexist in a single document, and websites can present multilingual content in a unified way. The cultural and technological impact of Unicode is immense. Writing systems at risk of extinction, like Georgian, Ogham, or Glagolitic, can now survive digitally. All languages gain equal representation online, preventing digital marginalization. Machine translation, multilingual search engines, and optical character recognition (OCR) systems all rely on Unicode. In short, Unicode is the backbone of global written communication in the digital age. Today, writing is no longer just on paper. It exists in databases, web pages, mobile applications, APIs, and even artificial intelligence models. It is a form of data that can be processed, indexed, searched, and transmitted worldwide. Unicode has taken writing to a new level. Writing is no longer only read. It is understood, analyzed, and acted upon by machines, all while remaining a human tool for communication and expression. In the trace of ink, the endless flow of writing, the history of writing is not only the story of changing letters and surfaces. It is the evolution of how the human mind expresses itself. This journey, which began on cave walls, continued along a line stretching to clay tablets, papyrus scrolls, paper, the printing press, and finally, digital screens. But this line is not straight. Every step created new ways of thinking, recording, and preserving knowledge. Writing was born as a tool for keeping records. Agricultural societies developed symbols to document their crops, debts, and storage. Soon, however, the scope of writing expanded beyond the economic. It became a cultural and intellectual instrument. Religious texts, epic stories, scientific observations, philosophical ideas, all endured through the power of writing. Knowledge in a society could now be transmitted to the next generation not just orally, but in documented form. This fundamentally shaped education, law, governance, science, and even religion throughout history. Writing became the memory of social order, and this memory, with each new technology, became faster, more accessible, and more permanent. The invention of the printing press multiplied knowledge. Paper became the most common medium to carry it. With the digitalization of writing, information ceased to be a physical object. It became data, code, and networked content. Yet its essence did not change. The human effort to pass on knowledge and identity persisted. Today, writing can reach millions of people simultaneously. But this speed brings new questions. Does writing still carry the depth of thought? Or does information gain quantity while losing quality? The trace of ink may now be virtual, yet this trace still carries memory, culture, and thought. Writing remains the most tangible tool of humanity's search for permanence. This flow, from stone to tablet, from tablet to screen, is, in fact, the story of human history itself. And that history continues to be written. Human history is a journey that advances by leaving traces. From the figures drawn on cave walls to the lines inscribed on paper, from stone monuments to digital screens, every mark has become a part of our collective memory. Yet what truly matters is the shared quest behind these traces. The desire to express ourselves, to share meaning, to transcend time. Technologies change, tools are renewed, but humanity's urge to leave a mark remains constant. And when these traces come together, they form the shared story of humankind.